Hi, everybody. Thank you for joining today. This is Brian Shopper, Marketing Manager at Geopath. And I just wanted to say welcome and thanks again for joining the webinar. So today's topic that we're going to be diving into, basically the overall topic for today is just to get a better understanding of the new 2021 mid-year forecast that we just released. And so joining me today, I've got Dylan Mabin, SVP of Product, on the line as well, and obviously me here, Brian Shopper.
Hello.
Sorry about that, Dylan. So today, our agenda, a handful of things that we're going to go through and sort of just get a better understanding of. But the first thing we want to start with is how the mid-year forecast itself was developed and the different things that went into that, and just how COVID has played an impact in basically everything the last year or so. So in addition to talking about how we got to the new forecast, we're also going to give some best practices and some guidelines on what you can expect and sort of the best ways to use the data as we're going forward and now using this mid-year number. We'll also talk about some of the refinements and tweaks that have been made to the reach and frequency model. And then towards the end, we'll take a little bit of time to walk through within the Insight Suite and just show where you can find the new mid-year forecast and how you can switch between the different data sources and where you can find the audiences and all different things like that. And then of course, we'll take questions along the way as we go through. And so if you have a question as we're going through and you just would like some clarification on anything, or if there's something you'd like us to go back and talk about a little bit further, please use the Q&A widget within Zoom itself. There is also the chat widget, but it's a lot easier for us on our end to keep track of in the Q&A section. So yeah, please feel free to send anything through that way. So a little bit of background on the forecast itself and just what we'll be doing today. For most of you, I'm sure this is not new information, but until this forecast itself, Geopath has always done an annual average forecast metric. And that's what our impressions have traditionally been based upon. And so the way that that's always been done has been looking at previous traffic patterns and just forecasts built upon accrued numbers throughout years, and just giving us a better understanding of how travel is trending, how movement of people are trending. And so usually that's how our forecast, that's a big portion of how the forecast is built. But of course, with most things around the world, everything changed in March of last year. So all of that really had to result in a totally different approach to everything going forward. And so that'll be how we, what we talk about today is just how we got to this point and how we did the mid-year forecast itself. Basically, like I was just saying, in order to do the forecast itself responsibly, we had to look at obviously past travel trends, but then the current travel trends that were happening as markets were shutting down. And now, of course, as markets are reopening, all of that comes into play in this mid-year forecast. So I think that was the last slide here. So let's jump right into that.
Great, thank you, Brian. And hello, everyone. I hope everyone is doing well. Based upon these numbers, it looks like everyone is doing better than they have previously been. So let's hop into the next slide and talk about sort of what we've been seeing and observing over the past couple of years, and most importantly, of course, the past couple of months. If we look back over the past decade of travel, traffic volume has been steadily increasing. Some of this can be attributed to just population increases, but of course, everyone knows on some of the major roadways, especially as you're getting towards some of the more centralized, inner city areas or interstates and such, you're seeing a lot of congestion. Obviously, roadways are being improved upon to facilitate those higher levels of traffic. I'm sure everyone's always dealing with construction on some of their favorite roadways. And so over the years, we've seen a significant amount of increase. Last year, everyone's tired of the story. COVID just devastated travel for a lot of people. Now, we did rebound very quickly as everyone figured out how to exist during the pandemic, but we're still reeling from some of the after effects of some of those behaviors, and those are likely going to last for a little bit longer. But in many areas, they have come back to very close, if not exceeded pre-COVID activity. So if you don't mind switching to the next slide. For reference, one of the things that we often look at, and this is a really nice stable resource from the Federal Highway Administration, looking at the travel volume trends year over year. And you can see in the blue line, sort of the expected traffic volume from counting stations that the Federal Highway Administration monitors across the country, both urban and rural areas, highways, local roads, et cetera. If we just look at the highways themselves, you can see that in the urban areas on the left, there was obviously a big decrease and still an ongoing offset versus pre-COVID years. Rural areas are a little bit closer, even during the latter half of 2020 itself. And in 2021, the line in red, you see it very close to pre-COVID levels, almost getting at them in March. A lot of that can be attributed to an incredible amount of activity during spring break. And we're going to be likely trending very closely down to that blue line. We'll see how it's going to be tracking that as time goes on, which we'll continue to do. So as a baseline, what it's always nice to look at is what does a typical year looks like pre-COVID, back when people used to call, quote, normal. So this is what people previously would refer to as a normal year. So what happened in 2020? Well, you can see in the beginning of the year, activity was fairly high, things were booming, but then COVID hit and we have this now familiar pattern where there was a decrease April and May and this settling into the new normal. Now, if you don't mind moving to the next slide. Now, this wasn't just a change in the volume of travel. The locations where people were even spending their time changed dramatically. This had big implications on the pedestrian volumes for inventory. And we're also still monitoring this as we're looking at how patterns have changed year over year and then month over month now, as the activity is now coming back in many of these areas. We do expect that they are going to come back quite significantly. However, there a little bit of to be determined on to how commuters are going to be returning to the offices in some metropolitan areas. There have been reports of some offices not reopening fully or still enabling remote working for their employees. So we are going to be monitoring that. We'll talk about how we're going to be updating additional releases in the future around that timing. So let's talk about the original forecast, because the important thing that everyone wants to hear about today is, well, what's the mid-year forecast? Well, let's talk about what we thought was going to happen back in November when we were first developing the forecast for 2021. And if you look at the gray line, in September and October, the recent months, back then, we were still trending at a fairly stable offset versus prior years. And that was expected to continue into 2021. And then the expectation was that we were going to see a recovery toward the latter half of the year. Now, at the time, vaccine approvals had just been announced mid to late November, and vaccine availability was still uncertain. But we were expecting the recovery to gradually happen in Q3. Now, fortunately for everyone, that happened much faster. And the response and availability of vaccines was a monumental success. And we're still seeing a lot of that happening, but those people that wanted to have the vaccine immediately ran out, were able to get it, and it was made widely available across the country. So we saw a huge increase in people's activity across the country, and of course, regionally as well. So this is where we are today in the yellow line. And what are we going to now forecast for the rest of 2021? So what we are, and June is, in the yellow line, June is not totally done yet. So that's a couple of weeks ago. So we'll see how things end up lining up on June. But the green line is essentially what the mid-year forecast is. And you can see it's a little bit less at the national level versus the quote normal years pre-COVID. But we're going to continue to trend closer as time goes on. And because what we are providing is an annual forecast, I want to make sure that this is made clear here. What we are forecasting is still a 12-month period. So it's not just 2021. What we are forecasting is 2021 into 2022. So the 12-month period is June 2021 through May 2022. And if you can go to the next slide, you can see how this forecast is going to occur. So the expectation is that we will be returning to those pre-COVID activity levels by mid-year of 2022. Unfortunately, we also are going to be continuing to monitor this situation and continue to update forecasts and audience delivery expectations for all of our audited inventory between now and then, as we continue to get more information, more traffic data, more mobility data into our systems. So all in all, that's a very nice thing to see as recovery has happened. But what I wanted to make sure we are all able to talk about today, and we wanted to share with you, is what are some of the expectations that you should keep in mind as you're using this forecast. So I think one of the most important things to keep in mind is that while at the national level, and that chart that we were just going through is nice and sort of comforting to see how recovery has happened across the entire US. The US is an incredibly big country. We have over 200 DMAs, thousands and thousands of counties, and every single neighborhood is behaving slightly differently. So the expectation in the marketplace today that all of our members should keep in mind as they are using the Geopath data is to keep in mind that recovery is regional, and not only regional, but also going to be unique by the type of inventory, because inventory inherently is placed in different areas of a particular market. You're going to have transit shelters in some of those core urban business districts and in some of the residential areas. You're going to have bulletins on interstates, and each one of those is going to be affected slightly differently. But all in all, markets do behave sort of as a whole, and you're going to be seeing a lot of activity move together. But that's something to keep in mind as you're trying to understand some of the differences between the 2020 metrics, the 2021 metrics, and this mid-year forecast. One of the other things that we wanted to make sure we were providing our members guidance with was when to use data and which data to use. So hopefully this can clarify a couple things that are pretty cut and dry, and then there's going to be the fuzzy area in between. But for plans with activity through June 2021, if they were started prior to that, use the original forecasts. That's safe to do. If you are now planning anything that is beginning after June 21st, so any new contracts or any future activity, use the newest forecast. I've often used the analogy that you don't use the forecast for this upcoming weekend that was available 10 days ago. You use today's forecast. We might have said that it was going to be rainy this weekend. Well, 2 days from now we know that it's not going to be. So you use the most up-to-date forecast available when you're trying to make decisions moving forward. Now, there are going to be some of those, well, it started now and it's ending in the next forecast. Our recommendation to our members is to run it with both data, which are both available in the APIs that we provide to our members and in the Insight Suite. And we recommend that our members do a comparison of both to understand any impact of some of the changes. Some markets are not going to see much change because they had already sort of recovered, if you will, prior to the beginning of 2021. They were less impacted by the pandemic itself. So take a look at the data, make sure you are looking at the data, comparing them if needed, and whenever you're providing information to your client or you're asking for information from someone, make sure that you're asking for the specifics of what version of the data was it that they're providing. So disclosure is super helpful in this because there are going to be a lot of different data sets out there, and things are only going to get a little bit more interesting, if you will, as time goes on. So in addition to the volume of traffic and the volume of trips that we have now a better understanding of pre-pandemic, during the pandemic, and as we are now recovering, it not only has an impact on the volume of impressions, but it also has an impact on the reach and frequency itself. So let's talk about that. So some of the big changes, a lot of these are ones that are relevant to switching from 2020 to 2021, but I want to make sure everyone is keeping these in mind as we are also looking at the 2021 mid-year forecast. The first one is that the legacy methodology, that which the 2020 data was built upon for reach and frequency, was based upon a model that leveraged travel surveys to understand how often people self-reported how often they were making trips. Now, we don't have to rely upon surveys. Surveys have their own unique challenges in trying to ask people to recall what they have done. Geopath now has the ability to leverage movement of mobile devices as people move across the marketplace, leave home, go to work, come back, go down the same roadway, or run other errands as time goes on, to be able to understand the frequency of circulation on that same roadway, day after day, week after week, going on for an extended period of time that we have never been able to analyze. So this is a really exciting time to be able to have precise information. And that has driven a lot of new understanding and had implications on the outputs from our reach and frequency models. So as we understood that trip volume was going to change, we also were observing that trip frequency was going to change. However, that wasn't the biggest impact between the 2020 metrics and the 2021 forecast. That can be attributed to the fact that we went from surveys to observed trip movement. So these visuals are going to be helpful to show how trip frequency has changed. But if, as I just said, trip volume is down versus pre-COVID, trip frequency also was going to be down. Now, it has since recovered, but I want to make sure that we're going over these concepts. Now, pre versus post-COVID, this is an analysis that we had done in Los Angeles. The average frequency for a week of circulation for Los Angeles was about 2.2 exposures per week, versus middle of COVID, where we were seeing an average exposure of about 1.6 exposures per week. So frequency was lower, traffic was lower during those times. Now that has since recovered, and the 2020 mid-year, or not in all cases, but in many cases, that frequency has recovered, and all of those updated trip frequencies are reflected in the 2021 mid-year forecast. Now this is a chart that's showing how the observed frequency over time builds. And this was actually really interesting when we were doing this analysis, because you can see on the weekends, on day 6 and 7, day 13 and 14, day 20 and 21, that there was a little bit of a stall, if you will, as more people were going on roadways that they hadn't gone on during the week. So you're getting incremental reach on day 6 and 7 due to the fact that there were new trips being made, which was interesting. Now, comparing that versus what we had been modeling off of from the travel survey, you can see that there's a very big discrepancy of the observed trip frequency versus self-reported trip frequency on the same roadways. So this was a big driver between reach and frequency. If you're looking between 2020 and 2021 forecast, now for the 2021 forecast, We've also implemented some improvements. You can go to the next one. That have a little bit more to do with where we understand people are coming from. So part of the precision of the data that we have available is understanding what neighborhoods people live in versus what roadways are traveling on. So if we look at a roadway and we can see the neighborhood contributions of where people are coming from, we can have that for every unique piece of inventory. But when we combine them together to calculate reach and frequency for a package, we can leverage that duplication at that local neighborhood to be able to understand how reach builds. So here are some things I just want to make sure everyone's taking away. We've said some of these before in either previous forecasts or previous webinars on reach and frequency, that trip volume was down. Change this to was instead of is across the country, which means that they're lower TRPs per unit. And at the same time, trip frequency was also lower during this period. So combined with lower TRPs, it is possible that reach may have stayed the same for the same roadway. The same people that are traveling need to use that same roadway. They're just doing so less often over periods of time. And I think the biggest one that people are need to keep in mind, and we want to make sure everyone can understand as we're talking about the 2021 mid-year and the differences in reach and frequency, is that the reach and frequency is now calculated and the duplication is now calculated down to the neighborhood level. We're doing that at the census tract. So as you are combining inventory into packages, it's going to be much more sensitive to the unique footprint, the unique geographical coverage that those units have as they are contributing to the overall delivery of the plant. So why is this important? Well, again, the shift to the updated observed frequency and the shift to the observed data versus survey it's a drastically different way of calculating reach and frequency. And while trip volume has changed, trip volume has now increased versus the middle of COVID. So we're back to this sort of stable state in many areas of the country. And I'm hoping that a lot of people are finding improved value in the metrics that Geopath is reporting as reach and frequency is a little bit more sensitive and able to tell, I think, a lot of the stories and back up the value propositions of people's unique portfolios of inventory. So with that, what I want to make sure we pass on to you also today is how to access this information. And so I'm going to pass it back over to Brian.
Okay, sounds good. Again, if people have any questions, I've seen some questions come in, but if you have any questions, please feel free to send those in, and then we can take a look at those as we're doing this part. But yeah, so I'll jump into the Insight Suite in a second, but we have some screenshots here and just some kind of things to take a look at before we hop in. So if you're in the workspace module, and again, I'll show this in real time so everyone can see how I get there. But if you're in the workspace module, either in a market plan or in an inventory plan, you can select your data source just as you could with 2021 or 2020. But now you'll see we have this additional option here, this June 2021 to May 2022. So that's our mid-year forecast here. And actually just an important thing to point out, you'll see oh, my mouse went away. This 2021-06 number right here. Oops, sorry, clicked. So this 2021-06 number, that's what you'll see once you've selected the mid-year forecast. You'll see that kind of in the data source row right here. And just so no one is confused by that, that's just kind of how the system has to display it. But if you see this, you can see 2021-06, and you can look at that as like June 2021. So that's just kind of something to keep an eye out for when you're in the tool and you're looking around. When you expand the option, you'll see forecast and then the end and start dates. But just to sort of clarify, again, same thing here. Oh, sorry, Dylan, go ahead.
No, real quick, I wanted to chime in there. This is also important because when you are exporting or you're trying to compare multiple audiences, or you're trying to understand, when we talked about use case about wanting to run two different forecasts side by side, if you're doing persons 18 plus in the 2021 forecast and persons 18 plus in the 2021 mid-year forecast, you'll see that distinction. One will say 2021, and the other will say 2021-06. And so that'll be a nice way to just make sure that you're clearly looking at which data is coming from which release.
Yeah, that's a great point. And when we get into the Insight Suite in a second, I'll add one from each so you can see how those look. Also within the Explore module, I'll go back for a second. If you're familiar with how the function had been when we had the initial 2021 forecast and then the 2020 forecast, there was a bit of a difference in the layout of the audiences themselves, but the new 2021 mid-year forecast mirrors that same sort of familiar format that you were used to seeing for the profiles and all that. So I'll show that in a second as well, but just wanted to make mention of that. And then additionally, the mid-year forecast has also been updated within the impression variation data. So that'll be, that's all part of that as well. So that reflects the new forecast additionally.
Just clarification, that's going to be available first week of July.
Got it. Okay, so let me get my Insight Suite all opened up. And I'll start sharing this. Sorry, just one second. Okay, so I'll start here in the Explore module since I have this open here. But like I said, just as you could switch between 2020 and 2021 before, now you can use this data source dropdown to select which of the forecasts you're looking at. And again, when you have here, I'll actually change this so you can see it happen in real time. But so the 2021-06 will be there if you have the mid-year forecast selected. But if you go back to just the 2021 forecast, it'll put that there. So the original 2021 forecast will show up as just 2021, and then the mid-year forecast will show up as 2021-06, as we were saying before. And I'll jump over to the Workspace module and just show you that same thing. So again, within a market plan or an inventory plan, it's the same thing. It'll function the same way either way. But so in the add audience, and I'll jump back to this as well. But so if I were to go back to the 2021 audiences, you can see it now, again, just says 2021. And then if I switch back to the mid-year, 2021-06. And again, I'll switch back over to the Explore module just to show this one thing because I think it illustrates a little bit more clearly here. But for anyone who had been using the 2021 forecast so far, you may have noticed that the audience selection was a little bit different. We had, and this even now is a little bit different than it had been, but there was effectively a large list of all the available population categories with a search. But now within the new mid-year numbers, this select audience function here mirrors what the 2020 data used to sort of have in its structure here. So we have our population level, and there's still some more being added to this, but we have all of our standard demographics. We have the consumer profiles in all of the various different categories. So for any of the consumer profiles that you had been wanting to use for the 2021 numbers, you can now do that. Those are all here. We also have, so the pop facts we can talk about in a second, but the Prism Premier segments, just like we were used to with the 2020 numbers. Dylan, could you help me clarify on the pop facts just for the...
Yeah, sure. So pop facts, you may have heard us also call these our core audiences, 0, 5, 18, and 21 plus. These audiences are the total population for any type of living space, I guess you would probably say. Because the distinction here between pop facts is you also have persons 18 plus and under population, is that the pop facts, there you go. The pop facts demographics are including individuals in group quarters. Now, group quarters include both institutional and non-institutional housing. This includes things like military, college campus, nursing homes, correctional facilities, juvenile facilities. These populations have a very different travel pattern than the general population. And as we are doing our cross-tabulation methods, which is what's driving the population, if you can go back over and click over on population, we don't have any good understanding at the individual and household level, because these persons are not part of the census defined household, what their income, ethnicity, or gender distributions are. So they're excluded from the population composition on that first column. And so if you're looking for all persons, regardless of what type of living situation they're in, that would be the pot facts. If you're looking for a specific target that is a combination of anything like age, gender, ethnicity, or household income, you're going to want to use the population variables.
Awesome. Yeah, thank you. That was very helpful to go over. Let me hop back to the deck and see if there's see what's up next. So, and again, if anybody has any questions about the Insight Suite accessing and all that specifically, please feel free to reach out. We can revisit any of that. So yeah, there was actually, this is good. There was actually a question about this that came up a little earlier that I knew we would get to this. So just about the frequency of the forecast going forward.
So normally on, we would have been releasing forecasts on an annual basis on the first of the year, and then that forecast is valid for that calendar year. Knowing that we were moving toward monthly forecasts on our roadmap, and recognizing the uncertainty of what was going to happen during the recovery period of 2021, we previously stated back in December that we were going to release a mid-year forecast if needed. Well, it turns out we did. And so that's what this mid-year forecast is. It's still an annual forecast. It's just, instead of starting in January and ending in December, it's starting in June and ending in May. We are also going to be monitoring, as I said earlier, that we don't quite have a good understanding of how people are going to truly be returning to the office. We have a fairly good understanding of what people are saying they're doing, but as we already discussed also, what people say they do and what they do is a little bit different. So we are going to continue to be monitoring visitation, activity, trips in and around central business districts, and we will be releasing, if needed, an updated forecast toward the end of this year that will be valid for the period of December 2021 through 2022. And this is teeing up also teeing up also the inevitable sort of ongoing rolling forecasts, rather than doing this, what I've called the farmer's almanac method. We want to be able to start having more updated frequencies of, or a more frequent cadence of forecast delivery, and having granularity by month. So you'll be able to see how the impression delivery changes in February versus July of that forecasted year. So a lot of exciting stuff on the horizon for this. Now, one of the things that the question was asked, though, is, are we going to go back and update previous forecasts? The answer is no. Those are previous forecasts. They were reflect the understanding at the time that they were made, and we of course add or remove inventory during those forecasts, and then the forecast reflects the metrics for the audited inventory reflects for that forecasted period. So those essentially just become historical. This is what we knew at that time. Now, the impression variation report and more observed impression data is going to, I think, fill that gap of potentially what you may be looking for, what a lot of people are looking for is, and what the impression variation report provides, which is, this is what I thought was going to happen, what's actually happening and what's been happening. So you can then change, make decisions along the way if you need to during a campaign, or do better analysis post-campaign.
So just a couple things here at the end. And again, if anybody has any extra questions, please feel free to send those in. But there's just some general support materials that I wanted to make mention of that everyone who's on here should have access to as well. So on our website, if you go at geopath.org, and then the Geek Out tab of our website, if you scroll all the way down, you can find all of our past webinars. You can also find them on our YouTube page if you just want to go to YouTube and search for Geopath. But then also we have on the Geek Out page of our website, there's also the Geek Out library. And also, not even within the Geek Out library, but there are some FAQs and just more general information about the new forecast and different things like that. So all on our website and also within the Geek Out library, there are tons of different support decks and materials and things like that in case you have questions about, how was the forecast made, or, when does it, when is it effective until, all things like that. And if you have any additional questions, really about anything that we talked about today, or if you have questions not relevant to this that you wanted to ask, you can always reach out to geekout@geopath.org. And that's basically just our help desk line. And so that'll make its way to the appropriate person, for whoever your question is most appropriate for. Let's see if there's anything else. Yep. Yeah. So again, if you have, I thought there was going to be another slide. So if you have any additional questions, please feel free to send those in. But yeah, so I think that might just be just about all of them. But here, let me just check the chat. Okay. Yeah, I think that's just about everything.
Well, thanks everybody for joining us today. It's certainly nice to be able to provide some good news to the industry as things are recovering. So I hope the metrics are helpful in telling that story to your clients as people are getting back on the road.
Absolutely. All right. Thank you, everyone. All right, take care. Bye.